Conference realignment is sweeping college football right now. It's been this way for a while. Some of us feel like we're riding the wave. Others feel like we're drowning because of that wave, but it's here. You know what I was doing yesterday? I was reading a lot. I probably read more about conference realignment yesterday than I have throughout the last year combined. A lot of good work being done. I'm certainly not bemoaning the work. Like folks like Thamel and Uncle Dennis and Ross Dellinger, they're covering the heck out of this thing. Well-sourced. Everything's been good from a work standpoint. I just don't like the topic. But what I couldn't help but notice yesterday when I read everyone's coverage of conference realignment is there are two words mysteriously, conspicuously absent from all of those reports and quotes, both on the record and anonymously. And those two words that you never hear when people are talking about conference realignment are fans and players. A lot of you may work at a place where in lieu of pay raises, they just, do fancy-looking do-goodedness. It's really empty. It's hollow. No one cares that you get an extra break. No one cares that they have cake in the break room or balloons all over the place. You just want more money, obviously. Well, in this sport, the same kinds of people who do that sort of nonsense are the folks who they tighten their bow tie up and they say, oh, we're in this for the fans. Guys, it's all about the players. They don't mean that. At least the ones I'm talking about, they don't mean it. I know they don't. Because if they did, half the decisions they make, they wouldn't make. And they would also be willing to take financial sacrifice in order to appease player or fan. That, of course, is never going to happen because they were lying to you the whole time. That would be its whole separate show, but that kind of dovetails into a theme that you've heard on Late Kick before about one of my many reasons I've been opposed to playoff expansion. I just promised you I'm not going down this road. But for those of you who are new around here, I'm not a big expansion guy. It's never just been about that, though. I knew who was driving the bus on this stuff. You should know. It's not hidden, guys. It's right out in plain sight. You should be able to tell what kind of person and what kind of people have been driving the bus on this. And the fact is, I realized a long time ago, we were never going to get playoff expansion without all the rest of this, because the same people are at the wheel on both fronts. So what do we know today? As of this moment, we know Colorado's on the move to the Big 12. We already know that. We know from Pete Thamel that there is still no final TV deal for the Pac12. It looked like we were going to get finality on that today. Pete Thamel at ESPN reporting there is an offer probably coming that disproportionately puts a majority of the Pac-12 inventory on Apple. Not great, Bob. Not great at all, but it's something. The dollar figure is going to be in the low to mid 20 mil per year range per member institution. It's not remotely competitive with what the Big Ten or the SEC get. No one thought it would be. I'm just reminding people who don't follow this stuff day to day. Here's all you need to know. If you're bored by this stuff and you want like a 30-second synopsis, Arizona's ready to leave the Pac-12. They're only ready to leave if Arizona State and Utah do it because no one wants to go alone. And so in lieu of forming a backbone out there, it's strength in numbers time. And the Pac-12 and George Kliavkoff, the commissioner, is trying to convince them to stay, and he's trying to cobble together a good enough media rights deal that's competitive compared to what they would get if they went to the Big 12. So basically what we're asking right now is the deal they're about to reveal out there, is it good enough to convince those three schools to stay? My best guess is no. I don't have any guided information on that. Most people who say they do don't either. And as we speak, the Arizona Board of Regents is meeting. Jesse told me there were several thousand people, by the way, watching the live stream of that, because it's your tax dollars at work. And then in classic form, when there was anything substantive to talk about, they went into an executive session like 30 seconds in. So people had planned their whole day around watching this like it was a UFC fight or like a pay-per-view boxing event. And it's just gavel down, executive session. So who knows what's going on out there right now. The thought is they may very well be prepared to leave and go to the Big 12. So my guess is they'll go. That's just my guess. That is not guided information. I care more about the totality of it all. And it does no good to remind you, no, I'm not crazy about this. Yes, I like the regionality of college football. I think most of you do. I've got a question for you in a second, by the way. I'll pose the question now, and I'll come back to the answer in a couple of minutes. How's that? If you could go back about a year or so, I asked a public question. It was a loaded question, public in nature. And I said, Colin, how did I word this? I said something to the effect of, knowing what you know right now and not knowing what you don't know right now, it's already confusing, but follow me here. Would you rather take college football as it existed in 2007 or as you think it'll exist in 2027? And that's it. That's all I gave you. Think on that, because you know what 2007 was like. Some of you liked the BCS, some of you didn't. So take everything you did and didn't like about college football from that time frame, compare it to what you think college football will be like in 2027. And if you could freeze one version of the sport in time for the rest of time, what would you take? Because I got about 60-40, you would like the future version of it a year ago. Boy, I bet those numbers have changed and changed drastically. So in the meantime, let me remind you of something else. While all the spotlight is on a random Board of Regents meeting in, Tucson? I think Arizona's in Tucson. While that's going on, let me remind you, we also got Oregon and Washington in play. We also got some schools in the ACC in play. And I believe in context clues, so I'm just going to leave this with you. And I noticed this, and then I had it backed up by people who would be sort of read in on such things. You know, Dan Lanning just signed a new deal at Oregon, and it's pretty interesting. Yeah, it pays him a lot of money. Yeah, it locks him up through an extended period of time. But there's this specific detail in Dan Lanning's new contract that made me look twice. And that is that he would owe $20 million in buyout if he leaves Oregon before the conclusion of that deal. Now, knowing what you know about the Pac12 and how unstable it is out there, knowing what you know about Lanning and how his stock continues to increase every day, why would a guy with options, and probably options that are going to grow in nature as he continues to succeed, why would he ever lock himself into a deal like that if he was uncertain about his program's future? Just enjoy this pregnant pause, pick up what I'm putting down, and understand why I don't think Oregon is long for the Pac-12 world. And I'm not alone there. But you don't have to necessarily have behind-the-scenes info. That right there could be seen by everyone. My mom and dad down in Fortson, Georgia, could look at that and take that context clue and say, huh, so this dude's locking himself in a prison voluntarily up there? No, he's not. I just think he may know something the rest of you and myself as well are going to find out in the near future. So let's go back to my question I just posed. Forget a year ago. Now it's right now. Right now, August 1st, 2023. Would you rather take college football as it was in 2007, or would you rather take college football the way you think it will be in 2027? 2007, we still had regionality. We had the BCS. You had never heard the phrase bowl opt-out before. You had never heard the phrase meaningless November game before. You did not have a college football playoff, and a lot of people were crying for it even back then. For the record, you had a 2-loss national champion that year. What would you rather have? I mean, it's a slam dunk for me. You give me the BCS 8 days out of the week over what we have now and what we're headed towards. That's not to say, you know, the sport is doomed and falling off a cliff. But, man, if you're talking about preferability or preference, because I don't know if preferability is a word, go back to 07. Take me back to 07 or 08 or 09. All right. So I'm going to be professional about this. It's going to take like a minute, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to take a sip from the chalice. So all the things. This was always coming. You know that, right? Immunity. This was always going to be this way. The nuts and bolts, the devil of the details, that was to be determined, but this was always the end game. When you let the folks who control college football right now finally get their hands firmly on the wheel, both hands on the wheel, and you got, in some cases, what you wanted with the college football playoff expanding. Some of us didn't like it. Several more of you did like it. I think a majority of you did like it, based on what I've heard at least. And you may have looked at folks like us who were sort of dragging our feet or being drug kicking and screaming into that new expanded world, and you said, why are you fighting progress? You know, why are you against more football? That's the kind of stuff that would be thrown at me. And I could have my own reasons just when it comes to the isolated playoff argument. But that was never what I went to. You notice if you've watched or listened to the show for a long time, I always went much bigger picture because it's always been about that. You were never going to get playoff expansion without conference realignment close behind. You were not going to ever live in a world where you got one and didn't get the other. And I made that argument, and people said, that's total non sequitur. Of course we can have expansion in the playoff without realigning conferences. Why would we ever have to do that? We don't. They don't have to do it. They want to do it, therefore they're going to do it. Doesn't matter what a single fan thinks, doesn't matter what a single player thinks, because this sport no longer revolves around fans or players. And some would say it never did, but I would imagine you go back in time 20 years, it was a whole lot more palatable for some of those than maybe the decision-making process is moving forward. You were never going to get that, though. You were never going to get expansion without conference realignment. It's just like you can't have income without taxes. And some of you try it every year and you pay a penalty for it. Or either you head to the Caymans. Like, you're not doing that. It was never going to happen. And it was always sort of, I thought, a given. I hoped I was wrong. I wasn't. The only times I'm wrong are when I hope I'm right. When I hope I'm wrong, I'm usually always right. And it sucks, but it's the way it is. So, who knows where Arizona is going to be tomorrow? What I know is when stuff happens, we'll talk about it on the show. But by and large, it's August. So from here on to January, we're talking about college football on the field. And then the off-the-field stuff, we'll just weave it in when it's really, really necessary.